I think this is the perfect marriage, ESPN and Beyond Sport. And when I was approached to do this in Philadelphia, I would have walked here from Connecticut. Because this is where it all begins for me. My connection with sport, my connection with the word courage, my connection to SportsCenter and what I do for a living. 7 years ago today, I started my first day at ESPN, and for it to come full circle back here in Philadelphia, I can only share how I got here. 30 years ago, I was connected to the word courage and Beyond Sport. As an 8-year-old kid, trying to connect with my father. My dad came here in 1967, $2 in his pocket. Came from India. He lived in a YMCA for a couple of years till my mother and my brother came over. My dad worked hard, each and every day. He spoke English, but in our house we spoke a variety of different languages. And as an 8-year-old, I didn't really have a full concept or understanding of how to connect to my dad. Excuse me. And the only way I could actually have a conversation that was longer than, did you do your math homework I gave you? Yes. Was to talk about football and the Philadelphia Eagles. So on Sundays in the fall, I realized at 8, how can I talk to my dad? And I realized the only way was to bring in the newspaper, consume all the stats that they gave us. So when I sat next to my dad on this Sunday, and he was cussing at the TV, yelling at the Philadelphia Eagles as a passionate fan, I could say, Dad, hey, Ron Jaworski's not a bad guy. Look at these numbers. Dad, he's got like 6 touchdowns in the last 3 games. That was the only way my dad stopped and recognized me and had a conversation with me. For an 8-year-old kid, it was the most courageous thing I could do. And for me, it was the most important relationship I could establish with my father. And I realized at that moment, it wasn't just on the football field. I was going beyond. I was breaking a barrier. And I was understanding my father, but my father was understanding an American kid here in America who's consumed with sport, who can relate with sport, who could relate to people through sport. It was the biggest barrier. And honestly, if I didn't go through that barrier, I don't think I'd be here today, on the air, as an anchor, representing ESPN each and every morning. So to be here, especially 2 days after that fantastic win on Monday night, to be here to share that story with you guys, and also share the stories of 5 dynamic people who use courage through sport and make connections with people around the entire world, it's such an honor. Now, courage comes in so many different forms. And before we begin this panel, we need to bring up the courage that we witnessed 12 years ago, in this past hour. Men going back, women going back inside the towers, first responders, men and women representing the fire department, the police department in New York, to save lives. I'd like to take a moment of silence to remember those thousands of people a dozen years ago that gave it all to try and save the many. We will never forget. And on this day, let's celebrate the courage we see around the world. It is my pleasure to introduce 5, once again, dynamic people to talk about their experiences around the globe connecting sports with people and breaking down barriers. I'd like to introduce Luke Dowdney first, founder of Fight for Peace. Round of applause. Tami Hay, Director of the Sports Department, Perez Center for Peace. John Layfield, founder of Beyond Rugby, Bermuda. Thania Mukith, Beyond Sport Young Ambassador. And Oliver Percovich, founder of Skateistan. Guys, the first question, let's just go down the line here and talk about your experiences and the programs, because each is so unique in its way, yet you share a common bond of the courage and connecting through sports. So what makes your program courageous, Luke?
I don't know if it's so much our program as the young people that are in it. I work in a community in Rio called Complexo da Maré, and it has a huge problem with gun violence and drug factions that control the community. So I think the kids that come to our program on a day-to-day basis have to wake up in a community where peace is not a given, peace is a luxury. It's a community where less than 2 months ago, during a police operation, 10 people were killed in less than 3 hours. And it's within the context of Rio that has a huge problem with gun violence, and Brazil as a whole, so as many cities around the world do. We're looking at 36,000 deaths in Rio from guns in the last 12 years. And I've published some work on this, and when comparing Rio with some of the war situations around the world, Rio actually came up as worse. So we compared a sort of 25-year period between the Colombian Civil War and just the city of Rio in absolute numbers, and the city of Rio came up above that. So it's a context that I think will create situations where young people, just to go to school, just to get up in the morning, and be what they can be, a lot of stuff that we take for granted is very courageous. I walked into a favela community. You can tell from my accent I'm British, but I've been in Brazil for the last 20 years. And I walked into a favela community at the end of the 90s, and I walked around the corner and I bumped into a kid who was about 15 holding an M16. So in the communities, it's openly armed young people in this situation who are there through lack of pretty much other options and choices. And the first thing that struck me was, how do you talk to someone who's 15 or 16 who's already given up to the point where they've gone into a drug faction and they've said, I don't really care anymore if I live or die. And I boxed when I was a kid, so I knew that boxing was a very powerful way to create a dialogue with young people that maybe weren't doing too well at school, maybe they dropped out of other more kind of traditional programs. So I started a small boxing club in Maré, started with 10 kids. I'm sad to say that 5 of those 10 kids are no longer with us due to gun violence. But we've grown over the last 12 years thanks to the courage of the kids in our program. And we now have centers both in London and Rio. We're in about 37 communities around the world. And those stories of courage we find everywhere we go. So as we're rolling out into communities around the world, we're finding that this issue of gun violence is not something that's just affecting Rio. 7 out of 10 violent deaths in the world today happen outside of conflict situations. They happen in our cities, they happen in urban areas, and they happen because of guns. And the 15 to 24-year-old age group of young males primarily are the group that are most affected by this. So we need to find ways to work with these young people, specifically because that age group is growing more than any other age group in the developing world. So it's an age group that we need to harness, and sports is a wonderful way to do that, and boxing is as well. The last point I'd like to make, is obviously we've got lots of panelists here and I don't want to talk too much, is that it is sport, but it's not just sport. So Fight for Peace we have a very holistic program, and we've learned that by combining boxing and martial arts together with very formal education programs and more traditional stuff, the mentoring, the employability, the social support services, that combination, that integration is what makes a difference. But it also means you can create amazing stars from within those communities. Last Tuesday night, Roberto Custodio, who's a young man who joined us when he was 12, having lost his father to the drug trade. His father wasn't involved in the drug trade, but he was killed by the traffickers. He won the Pan American Games in Chile last Tuesday night at welterweight. So he's now the champion of the Americas and a real gold medalist hope for 2016. But he's a young man who's also studying, still at school, and is a massive example for other young people within his community, and a real example, I think, of courage.
Tami? So how do you use courage to help your program?
We will not be able to do what we're doing at the Paris Center for Peace without courage, because we are doing beyond politics. We're creating new reality on the ground, because if you will sit and wait for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to be over, for the politicians to finish that, we will wait for ages, unfortunately. As an Israeli, as a person that was born in Israel, was raised in Israel, went through the whole Israeli life, going to the Israeli army, being educated, of hating my enemy, being afraid from a Muslim, being afraid from a Palestinian, from an Arab speaker. This is not the way I want my children and my society to be educated and live in. I want to create them hope. I want to create them a space when they will be able to feel that there is hope in our region, because most of the people, unfortunately, feel hopeless on both sides. And so for us and at the Paris Center for Peace, sport is still an amazing tool to reach out to communities that basically are hopeless from the situation. For me, on a daily basis, when I get up to work, I understand that what I'm doing is more than a regular job. I'm not able to do what I'm doing without courage. Without courage, not only with me, but with all the people that I'm working with on both sides. I'm not doing the work this by myself. I need to have a real trust with my Palestinian partner. For this, you need courage, because we are still in conflict. There is still violence. There are still fears on both sides. So when we are traveling in the West Bank, visiting our Palestinian partners, finding myself in a situation that I'm hosted in a house of my Palestinian coach, spending a night in the West Bank. As an Israeli, this is something that I can't even explain. What does it mean? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for them to have an Israeli that sleeps in their house, seeing the sports project, going and really trying to feel and understand a little bit what is happening behind the separation wall? This is huge. And I'm bringing that message back home, back to my Israeli participants as well. What we are doing on a daily basis is creating safe spaces on both sides, in Israeli community, in Palestinian communities, where they don't have any access, first of all, to sports program, and the second of all, to peace-building activities. Based on our daily reality, we don't have access to one another. In order to meet, it's not just a spontaneous thing to do. You need to go through checkpoint, you need to work closely with the army, you need to get permission from your parents, you need to understand that you will pay a price sometimes for participating in our programs because you are collaborating with the enemy. But we're doing this for the last 10 years. We are working closely in many, many communities on both sides and bringing them together. And not just together, just play sport, any kind of sport. They're playing in mixed teams. They're not competing on each other. They're not fighting against each other. We are uniting them. They have one goal, and this is peace. And even if peace is still a dream for all of us, on the pitch, no matter if we play football, soccer, table tennis, wheelchair basketball, we even did rugby this year, we did Aussie football, any type of sport that can bring the people together and create them hope, this is what we're doing. And this is what it's all about.
Wow. She brought up rugby. Now, John, you used to be a WWE star, and this transition in Bermuda is remarkable. When you think about, you had no experience with the sport, used to be dominated by Bermuda players that were white, 100%. Now, 80% of the rugby players are black. What changed here? How did you connect to the youth?
When I first came to Bermuda and saw the problems that were coming in gangs, we realized we needed something to reach those kids. And we knew sport was the carrot that would get them there. We had some wonderful people that helped us. James Baderman in Fight for Peace in Rio was one of the gentlemen that came in. Mark Griffith, Play Rugby USA. Rob Costanato at Beyond the Ball in Chicago all came and helped us set up a curriculum for it. I'd be much better coaching American football. In fact, our kids ask us all the time, because I'll referee, and they'll say, is that illegal? And I'll have to go ask Coach Patrick Callow, because I have absolutely no idea. But we needed a sport that was rough and tough, just like our kids. There's a 50% black Bermudian male dropout rate in Bermuda. We have 3 times the world murder rate, and it's all black on black. If you come to Bermuda, the tourism minister would kill me if I didn't say this. You're very safe. And if you're in international business, you're very safe. There's no crime that goes on outside of gang on gang. And so that's one of the reasons we started this program. And we've asked these young men, a lot of them were not involved in soccer, football, or cricket, to come be part of our program. And they told us there's no way that you can put parameters and structure in place like this that is this strict on these kids. And I said, that's what we're going to do. We have a mandatory homework academy. We have mandatory tutoring. We have mandatory attitude. And once I took away homophobic slurs and the F word, the kids couldn't talk to each other for about 3 weeks. So we had a communication problem for quite some time. But when we first started our practice, we had kids that wouldn't even be on the same practice team with other kids. And we had an incident after about 4 weeks, and Patrick Callow is our coach, wonderful godsend from Northern Ireland, who did wonderful work in Northern Ireland. So he understood conflict and using sport when he came there. And we had a kid that came down and set down his backpack, and Patrick said, talk to the young man. So I pulled him aside, and I said, why am I talking to you? And he said, well, I'm putting my backpack down. I don't want to get it stolen. He was going to a gang fight, and he was going by himself, and he didn't want to get robbed also. So I went and ran off the gang. I came back, and I talked to another young man who had stopped him. And I said, I appreciate you stopping him, but I want to know why you did it. I said, because I know you're in the other gang, and that's not going to set well with your gang members. And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, well, that's what you told me to do, Coach. He said, we're teammates, right? I said, well, yeah, I didn't think you were listening, but I said, that is what we tried to tell you to do. And we've now created this culture that does take courage, because now the culture is to excel and not to join a gang. Now the culture is not to try to find a gun. We just had a retaliatory killing in Bermuda just last week, and a lot of our kids were affected by this. We're trying to say, we want you in a gang, we want you in our gang, but that gang's going to excel, and that gang is going to graduate. And the national teams now were 100%, almost white. This last year's, the under-16s were 80% black island kids that came from our program. And we had to overcome that barrier that this was just a white expat sport of a bunch of guys who like to tackle each other and drink too much. Mm-hmm. And we had to say that this is now an island sport, which is what it's becoming. But to do that took a massive amount of courage and leap of faith of our young men to say this is now our sport. The fact that our kids went undefeated this past year and beat all the private schools has certainly helped quite a bit. We've just simply got better athletes. But that has helped tremendously, but it takes that courage to take a leap of faith to play a sport you've never played before.
John's talking about connecting with the young youth as well. Thania, you're a Beyond Sport Young Ambassador. You deal with Muslim women, young Muslim women. How do you connect communication-wise with them? Because you're yourself in that same situation.
Yeah, I mean, when I first joined the Tower Hamlets Youth Sport Foundation nearly 6 years ago, I had everything against me. Like being a Muslim, let alone a female coach, was difficult enough. And being a role model and someone representing young women and even boys, it's been difficult. Like the first ever session I had like 20 boys in the beginning. There weren't any girls. So me going in there as a female coach, you know, you're nervous and you think, okay, they're not going to listen to what you're saying. You've got a session plan here, they're not going to go with it. Already the boys just started saying, oh, you're a girl, you can't coach, like, you know. And then I had to kind of grab one of my guy friends who's a coach as well, and I said, can you just lead this session for me? Like, I can't, you know, I just need a bit of support. So he did it fine, and the kids listened, and when the tournament came, they came like 28th place or something out of 33 teams in the borough. So it was really bad, like they didn't play very well. And I thought to myself, I can either quit now or go on. Like I can try and just, you know, think of an approach that I can have with the kids to make sure that they listen and they can actually conform, and, you know, I can do this session or whatever. So the next session, I had about 25 kids turn up. There were only like a few girls and about 25 boys. And I was trying to devise a basketball session, right? And the kids just started messing around. They started doing pancake on top of each other. They just could not, like, they just didn't want to listen. And I was a little bit strict, the way, like, I was just being really strict with them. And then I just said, you know what, you can leave. You don't have to be here. Just go now. I can't have you guys here. If you want to stay, you can stay, or else you can leave. And I think about 15 of them just walked out. And they swore at me, and, you know, they said, you're this, you're that, like you can't coach, you're too strict and all of this. And I felt, you know, you get it in the heart a little bit. It's like, okay, am I good enough? Like, you know, I've got my hijab on, I'm a Muslim, I'm a female, and it's like, you have all these thoughts and think, is this for me, yes or no? But I had to stick it out. I just thought to myself, no, I'm gonna stick to the way I am. I'm gonna be strict and fair as well, like have this kind of mixed, balanced approach. So the kids walked out, and then the few kids that stayed behind, they were much younger, so they weren't really, like, they didn't really care. They were just like, oh, I wanna play. So I carried on coaching them, and I thought, whether I take 20 or whatever, like 6 is enough for me. I don't care, like, you know, I'll take these guys. And then the kids, yeah, so a week later, slowly some of the other kids started coming back, and they were like, Miss, can we come back, please? And I'm like, why do you want to come back now? They're like, we really want to play, and, you know, the other kids are having so much fun. And then I said, but did you not say that I was this? And they were like, no, it's just, Miss, you're so strict sometimes, and I just can't, you know. And then, so I thought, okay, all right, we'll see how it goes. And we still didn't do very well, but at least I had a good number this time. And I knew that I had to have this approach. Like, I couldn't go back and just be all like mushy-gushy and give them sweets and whatnot, because this, like, kids are like that. They want a bit of bribery to kind of like, so I decided to have like a fair, strict approach. And then like 3 years later, I managed to get them to second place for a few teams in the borough. So, you know, I was training them, and the more girls started joining in. I went to like knocking on doors and giving leaflets to parents and stuff, and they were like, oh, who are you? I was like, I'm a female coach in the local community. They're like, you coach? Like, they were a bit surprised as well. And I said, yeah, like, you know, if you got any girls in, you know, in your house or whatever, that they want to do some sport, you know, I'm here. And they were really fascinated by that. And even today, I got parents calling me like, I want to get my girl to join in the club, not just because I'm a female coach and whatever, but they just felt a bit more comfortable, like, especially if their kids are going through like obesity and like putting on weight and whatnot, that's another thing as well. So yeah, I got them to second place. The following year, I got them third place. And there was a point, just when it hit 4 years, I actually wanted to leave the foundation. I actually wanted to quit. We all go through this moment in life where we kind of feel like you haven't done enough, or you don't get much recognition from your boss or whatever, because I have always been a bit insecure about my weight, sorry, but I have been a bit insecure about my weight and stuff. So I felt like my boss had favoritizing the skinny girls who are running around and coaching and stuff. So I always kind of like took a back seat when it come to like the meetings and, you know, being with the colleagues and whatnot. So I just kind of focused on my kids and just focused on them and coaching them, and stayed in my little area until last year, my boss nominated for the Beyond Sport, like the nomination form came from Beyond Sport, and then he wrote this massive proposal saying Thania's the most passionate person here, and I feel like her experience in Palestine, I went in Palestine in 2011, that kind of changed her outlook on a lot of things, and she's just doing such a great job, and it was just, what he wrote was beautiful. And then now I'm a Beyond Sport Young Ambassador, and it's like, it's been a very emotional roller coaster for me, like especially last year as well, but like, I just want to thank Adam Hall particularly, because like, he's been so supportive like this whole year. Like, can everyone just give him a clap, please? Like, and all of them, like the Beyond Sport team, Lex, they've really put us on a pedestal. Like, they've given us this platform. And sometimes you look at young people and think, you know what, they're just young people. They don't know any better. But I have not been treated like that. I felt like, you know what, I can be an adult and I can be mature, and I can give input and send proposals and say, like, you know, we want to talk about religion a little bit more, we want to talk about Muslim women and girls and whatnot. So what I want to do now is create a project for particularly young Muslim girls to get involved in basketball, some kind of sport like that, to, yeah, just to kind of get away from all these stereotypes and labels that are put on us. And Anne-Marie from Comic Relief, she's been my mentor, so she's been really supportive in that as well. So it's been tough trying to get girls on board, but it's a very slow process, and it is coming to that, you know, it's getting there. And I just want to like mention something that I got yesterday, which kind of given me that inspiration again. I kind of needed to be re-inspired coming here. Brian Dawkins said something yesterday, which was really, like, gave me goosebumps.
He used to play for the Eagles, safety.
Yeah, Brian Dawkins, he said at the Beyond the Divide event yesterday, he basically said the richest place on earth is your graveyard. And everyone's just like, okay, graveyard, what are you on about? There are people in there that had dreams and ideas. They had maybe had a cure for AIDS, they maybe had a cure for HIV or whatever, and they couldn't speak out, and they didn't, you know, express that or expose it to the world. So why we're here today, like, you know, there is a reason why we're here. And when we've got an idea and we can do something with it, like we should do it and, you know, put that into action. And that kind of just blew me away when he said that. Like, and I have loads of ideas. I usually jump ahead with my ideas, but I know that I have to start off somewhere small and then work my way up there. And that gives me courage, and just knowing that I don't have to take off my hijab or strip off my religious identity to do what I want to do, especially use sport to kind of like break down these barriers and whatnot and everything against me. You know, I can still keep on my hijab and do that. Good. So that gives me courage. Yeah. So.
Let's go to. Let's go to Oliver here now. Oliver, you're introducing skateboarding in Afghanistan. That's courageous by itself. Just the concept, considering it's a free sport with no boundaries, and you're going into an area which requires plenty of courage. What challenges do you face when it comes to, you know, you're here in the States, you're going to be traveling around too, and you're trying to win support from the corporate world? What challenges do you face when you're pitching an idea that, hey, skateboarding in Afghanistan, how do you sell that to corporations?
Well, I think the first thing that everybody thinks is, what is the point of it? Isn't there other things that they need there? Don't they need health? Don't they need education outcomes? And I simply turn it around into, this is actually the best way to do it. It connects people together. This is the answer of doing it. But just being a skateboarder, you fall down, you get back up again. It is a long process of overcoming your own fears, and you have to be courageous to do it. When we're now ranked as in the top 100 NGOs in the world, yet people still laugh at the idea of skateboarding in Afghanistan and how it can work. So it is a continuous battle. It started when I was 5 years old and fell off the skateboard for the first time and thought, I'm going to master this thing. And it's something that you can just use to keep on getting over another hurdle.
So how do you sell this young concept to the young kids? Because to me, as a kid, I'm going to want to get on it, but I'm in America. In Afghanistan, they see a skateboard. How do you sell the concept that, hey, it's a skateboard, and this is going to help us?
Well, it helps that Afghan children are extremely courageous. They don't wait to watch you do a trick. They come over, they grab your skateboard, and they take off with it. So that showed me, that's really how Skateistan started. I was skateboarding in the street, and kids came across, and they simply wouldn't give my skateboard back. I thought, well, you've got to be pretty courageous to do that, because I don't let anybody ride my board usually. But it was their drive, and I think Luke also said that it's the kids that are the real courageous ones in terms of creating an opportunity for themselves, and when they're in such hard circumstances and they still get up again, and they still keep on trying, especially for girls, just to educate, just to access education. They have to convince their parents, they have to convince their older brother, they have to convince the neighbours and the neighbours' neighbours just to go to school. And that gives me the courage to go to a corporate and say, hey, this is actually the thing that you should be doing, and this is why. And people do get it, but it doesn't automatically make sense, skateboarding in Afghanistan, but it actually works.
And you've dealt with hardship, though, through the process. How do you keep kids still with the program when you've dealt with suicide bombers?
About one year ago, we had there was a 14-year-old suicide bomber that went to attack the US military, actually the international military establishment. He was 14 years old. He walked in there. A lot of the street working children that come to Skateistan, they work outside the base because there's soldiers that walk past, and they can quite often get money from them, or they've made friends with them, and the soldiers are pretty stoked that the kids are skateboarding, so they've made new friends through it as well. but it's also an extremely dangerous place to be. And the young suicide bomber, he was actually caught on camera, and he was telling the kids, "Hey, I'm strapped with a bomb. Get out of here." And they actually fought him. They weren't going to. They weren't going to. They were basically protecting the base. It's crazy, but they wouldn't. They didn't want him in their territory, and they were trying to push him away. And he exploded the vest. And so there were four of our staff and students that died in that attack. And then the other people from Skateistan were the ones to identify the remains, who dug their graves and were there to just every part of that family that has come together through skateboarding, through sport, was then also there to overcome that hurdle. And
they came back.
We have the brothers and sisters of some of those that died still come to Skateistan, and when they came back to Skateistan, they skated their hearts out. And they really, but it's not just about skateboarding. We use that to create leaders, and leaders in their families, leaders in their communities, and hopefully global leaders as well.
Wow. Tami, you mentioned connecting these kids in one of the most dangerous areas. What happens when they're connecting and they're not seeing who they represent? They're not seeing their backgrounds. They're not seeing what their parents are standing up for. What happens to these kids after they're done playing? I mean, it's kind of a retreat, and you're not thinking about the outside world, but you have to deal with the outside world afterwards. How do they handle that?
Well, we're not creating an illusion on the field. It's always connected to the reality. We are not ignoring from what is happening outside the pitch, for example, because the pitch helps us, once they arrive there, to speak about really the core stuff. For example, when we are organizing on a weekly basis a joint activity, when we bring the Palestinians and the Israelis to play, the reality affects it. For example, the Palestinians are late because they are delayed because of the checkpoints. It takes time. So this gives us the opportunity to speak with Israeli kids why the Palestinians are late. What does it mean for them to come and meet them in the Israeli communities? So this is not a daily thing you speak at home with your parents, or you don't really have the opportunity to ask questions about, but those questions are addressed on the pitch. Of course, according to the age group, in a way that we were trying to simplify it, that in a way that it will be easier for them to understand it, but we are not avoiding it. We are not trying to ignore what really is happening. And when a kid is going back home, I know, because we are speaking and we're talking with the kids, they are telling their parents about the things they are experiencing. We had a situation that a boy was hearing his father, an Israeli boy, was hearing his father shouting on the TV, "Oh, we need to kill all those Palestinians." And he was standing up and saying, "I have a Palestinian friend, father. Not everybody is bad like all what you're saying." And he was sharing this with us during one of the Gaza operations that we had. This is really a courageous boy. This is, in the community where he lives, it's right-wing community. They're not supporting of the idea of peace. They really don't like Muslims. But this boy made a change. He stand in the living room and said to his father that he is wrong. So those kind of examples for us means that, you know, they take something with them. And also on their weekly training sessions, the coach speaks about the process they're going through. They need to be prepared before every joint activity they will attend, because this is not an easy process to take part in. There are lots of emotional things that are engaged in that. So if we will not cater this off the pitch and on the pitch, this will not really show any results. And of course, we need to be patient, because in situation when the conflict is still going on and we are affected by the politics and the reality, you need to understand that you will not see immediate results. And this is also what I'm saying to our supporters and funders and donors. Sometimes I'm saying even no when somebody comes and asks to support a project for 1 year. I'm saying, I'm sorry, I cannot promise you that you will see results after a year. This takes time. The changing perception, it takes more than 1 year. It takes even more than 2 years.
You're building through generations.
Yes, yes. And this is what we're doing. We are creating new generation on both societies. And without the support of really courageous donors, corporates, we will not be able to continue do that. We will not be able to scale up because locally, it's difficult to find support. Financially, name it. It's tough. We are dependent on the international community. We are dependent on the global community because they need to make us to continue and do what we are doing because this is something that is unusual. People do not believe when I speak that we meet, that a 10 years old kid meet with a 10 years old Palestinian. This is an unusual sight to see.
Unfortunately, we're running short on time. We have just a couple minutes. And Luke, I know it's the extreme here, but with this question, I think this audience really would like to know, when you look at today's youth, there's a feeling of dread, negativity, when you're looking at the big picture in the future, if you're going to be counted on. You deal with the extreme with gang members. How do you make a connection? You brought up the 15-year-old with the gun. How do you make a connection to sell what you're pitching, that this is good, trust me, you're establishing a sense of trust. How do you make that connection with a guy who has a gun in his hand and sees only death in his near future?
Yeah, and they do. A lot of the young people that we work with have murdered by the time they're 15 or 16, and because they've been given orders by their bosses to do that. So it's definitely a challenge. I think in the beginning they thought I was crazy, to be perfectly honest. I was in Pacunia, one of the favelas in the Complexo da Maré, and it was just, they came to us. I mean, the beauty of boxing or any martial arts, we work with about 9 different martial arts now, is that you open the doors and then they start coming through the door. So the language at the beginning, the dialogue, is purely around boxing. I didn't talk about gangs, I didn't talk about guns, I didn't talk about step out of that. I talked about, I'm going to teach you how to fight. And often they came in because they wanted to learn how to fight, because they thought they could take that into the street. And then after a while, they began to realize that actually the philosophy they were learning, the rules, the ethos, the culture of the gym was all about controlled aggression, not about crazy aggression out in the street. It was all about a competition, all about being in the ring, all about learning about themselves and so on. That's how it started. Now, after 13 years in the favela, our favela is divided between 2 different drug factions. And we're running a program to take 40 of the most entrenched drug traffickers out at the moment. On both sides of the divide. And we have facilities working across the divide. And now, if a young person wears a Luda Pela Paz t-shirt, they pretty much have free access to cross a line that a lot of the community won't cross. So we've built that reputation locally. And I'm a real believer in strength through peace. I was hearing on CNN this morning about talking through peace through strength, talking about the Syria situation. And I've always said strength through peace, because I'm a real believer that actually to be really strong, and some of you were talking about this, is to stand up to peer groups within your community as a 13 or 14-year-old and say, no, I don't want to join that gang. I'm not going to do that. And what I really believe that every single young person that has gone on the wrong path and ended up in a drug faction or a gang, wherever we're going around the world, deep down, they're a human being. They're the same as you, they're the same as me. They deserve another chance. And deep down what you find, they'll never admit this, but whenever I sit down with them alone, the majority of them are in huge amounts of pain internally. They've done things they shouldn't have done. They've seen things that are terrible. They've often come from incredibly disadvantaged and violent backgrounds themselves. And when you give them a chance to step out, you see these tough macho guys who are kind of used to standing on the corner holding a weapon, effectively breaking down in tears. And you realize that you can connect with them through peace, and through that situation. And you can make that change. And again, we come back to this notion, but sport, whether it's in Palestine, Israel, whether it's in Afghanistan, and Bermuda, whether it's in East London, where we also work, is an amazing vehicle for that if you combine the rest.
Often sports anchors, and I hate it, and I never do it, they use the word hero when describing athletes on the football field or basketball court. You can't apply that. These are the real heroes. A round of applause for all they've done. Luke, Tami, John, Thania, Oliver. We could talk all day. Thank you so much.